And now I am very delighted to call our Keynote lunchtime panel to the stage. I am not going to introduce them extensively because I know they're about to have a thrilling, wonderful conversation up here. Y'all, they've been sitting together here for 45 minutes, so y'all know they're warmed up and ready to converse. So come on up, y'all. Y'all can step to the side of the stage here. And the Keynote panel is being led by Tony Pippa. And Tony is a podcaster in his own right. He is also from a small town in Pennsylvania. He's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and he's leading a really important new program that's looking at rural policy. And he's going to be discussing with Al Puhala, CEO of CapZone, Kyle Bridgeforth, a co-owner and operator, fifth generation minority-owned farm, Bridgeforth Farms here in Alabama, and Sherry Smith, president, CEO, and founder of the Alliance for Clean Energy, in a conversation about maximizing the opportunities in our particular moment, which has got a whole lot of turbulence and uncertainty, but a whole lot of opportunity and a ton of grit, too. So, Tony, take us away.
Well, thank you, Michelle. How's everybody doing? All right, so we have the killer after lunch session here, and we are going to do our best to keep it vibrant and keep you guys cooking, because I'm sure it's been a great day and a half so far. How is that going? Lots of good conversations? Learning lots? All right. Michelle just gave us a brief overview of everyone who's here to speak with me today, but I'm going to have them start off telling us a little bit more about what they're doing. And I'm going to start with Kyle. Kyle Bridgeforth, as Michelle said, co-owner and operator of a farm, fifth generation.
That's right.
Correct? Not too far away from here. Well, not right next door, but a few hours. But why don't we just get started? Why don't you tell us a little about your work? You're in a smaller place, and so like anybody, you're also very involved. Not just in the farm, but in other things in your community. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing in terms of creating opportunities for rural places.
Sure. I appreciate the intro, Tony. And Kyle Bridgeforth, we have a fifth generation farm based in the northern part of Alabama, Tanner. So a smaller township outside of the Huntsville, Athens area. Row crops are our main focus, but we also dive a little bit into the supply chain and the processing and other aspects of the ag industry. And our main goal, as has been for a long time, is to be somewhat of a model farm for how to outstretch your agricultural business. We've been fortunate enough to have some really generous, beneficial, and involved partners, from as high up as top retailers to insurance providers, but relationships that we've had for decades, people that are really ingrained in our operation. So we've been fortunate enough to have an outreach where we could showcase the benefit of having a long-term relationship, which in a rural environment is especially important. So one of the main things we do throughout the year, Tony, is we host something called Field Days, where the concept of a field day is to go out and see what's happening in a field setting, what kind of new agricultural techniques are available, what does a modern 2025 type of agribusiness look like, what does a day-to-day look like. That's how it started, but it turned into really an expo for everything agriculture. So the USDA, all your biotech, AI, robotics showcase opportunities there. John Deere, all of our partners, all of our customers even, all show up and have some type of participation to help engage and involve people from a rural setting, from an agricultural standpoint. How can we entice people to come back to agriculture? And it's been very successful, not just for people that are interested in farming, but people that are interested in design, people that can find any link to what they're doing, especially from a rural standpoint, any link to what they're involved in into farming. And it's it started off as just an opportunity to galvanize our network and our relationships and people we work with, but it's become really a second pillar of our operation in addition to agricultural production. So it tailors off into human health, economic development, all these ways that we can help advance rural communities from an agricultural standpoint for people that day to day may or may not have any involvement in agriculture, but still live in a rural setting. So that's our real outreach approach. Agriculture is the lens that we focus through, but we found that that's a great way to engage people from in a rural community, whether you're involved in agriculture or not. And we've seen a lot of great opportunities come from it. Job creation for people coming out of high school or college. A lot of people will, they may not have interest in farming or being in a field tractor setting like myself, but they can find their interest and a way to support it in a multi-trillion-dollar market, which there's a spot for everyone, especially everyone in a rural setting.
So relationships, innovation, which a lot of the world might not think of or a lot of the decision makers in the country might not think of when they think of as rural, but always a really big part of what's happening in a rural place, as well as inviting the community in and those interdependencies. So let me just, before we move on, you grew up there, then you left. What motivates you? What motivated you back to be back doing what you're doing? What motivates you for the work that you're doing?
Oh, sure. And that was that's a great question, Tony. I did grow up on a farm, and I did leave. For me, it was, I saw, growing up on a farm, my concern was that my work focus and career would be within the acreage of that farm setting. But getting further into my career, I found out it's a totally involved global business and network that is, every aspect of my interest has been able to, I found exploration through agriculture and how to come back to farming. So opportunities I didn't know existed were shown to me, and I was able to explore those, and that kept me engaged throughout a full career.
So Sherry, let me turn to you. You're co-founder and you run an enterprise that's around clean energy. When we think of rural, we think of rural feeding us. We also think of rural powering us. So talk to us a little bit about the work that you do. How did you get into it? And what is that work doing to enable tribal and rural communities to thrive?
Thanks, Tony. My name is Sherry Smith. I descend through both my mom and my dad from the Mi'kmaq Nation of so-called Maine and the Canadian Maritime Provinces, and from settler ancestors as well. And I founded the organization now called the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy in 2016. After having a long career previous to this one, working for Elon as head of workforce for Tesla, and before that, Solar City, and consulting. I've been in the clean energy space for a long time, 30 plus years. I am gray under this Miss Clairol, yes.
You don't have to tell us those secrets if you don't want to anyway.
Yeah, the Forbes took care of that. They told everybody how old I am. So when I first got started, so I didn't grow up on a reservation. I grew up in the Boston area, a white passing kid, being taught to hide my native ancestry because my grandparents and on both sides, mom and dad, were discriminated against. And my great-grandma was in a residential school in Shubenacadie in Canada, and those wounds ran deep, so I didn't know a lot. But in 2016, I was invited to visit a tribe in southeastern Montana. For the first time, I became acquainted with what energy poverty is. And energy poverty is a term that Americans use to describe either a lack of access to energy or when the costs of energy induce poverty. And I saw both. And I came away from there, and I consider myself one of the people on earth that have been blessed to have a true calling, spiritual happenings, let's just say. And I realized that I could not use the knowledge and the wisdom and the connections that I had had since the early 2000s when I was a founding director at the American Council on Renewable Energy and all the career in between there. I could not dedicate that knowledge and wisdom to making rich white guys richer anymore. So I pivoted and I used my Tesla stock and lived off of it for 6 years to stand up this org. Thank you. I also worked various odd jobs at the time so my husband wouldn't kick me out. He's a fisherman. They say when you marry the first time for love, marry the second time for riches. Well, I married for love the second time because he's a fisherman. So I had to get a second job, right? But the moral of this story is I learned what energy poverty was, and I witnessed for the first time the discriminatory rates, and please forgive me, NRECA members, but rural co-ops charge natives sometimes double or more what non-natives pay for the same electrons going down the same lines. I can stand at Red and Riva Gates' house on Standing Rock and look down the line 1 mile, and that guy's paying 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour, and they were paying 12.5 cents a kilowatt hour. And that is happening every day in America still. And in America, our rural communities, tribal and otherwise, are at the end of the line. There are 14,000 native households on Navajo Res alone that still don't have power, 85,000 native households in America that still don't have electricity in 2025. And I know there's still some rural communities that are non-native that have this problem. So when I discovered all this, I could not live with myself if I didn't try and do something about it. So flash forward to today, the Alliance, we are 100% philanthropically funded so that my team of almost 60 now still has their jobs, and we cannot be subject to the volatility of the federal dole, but we also cannot influence government at the highest levels if we're functionaries of government. I can't be working for the man if I want the man to do right by our tribes and by our rural communities. So that's where we are today.
All right.
Technical assistance, financial assistance with our Indigenous Power and Light Fund, policy advocacy, education and workforce development. We are basically a no-cost to tribes consulting firm.
All right. Wonderful. Well, we're going to go from food to energy to capital, because capital is also something that is difficult for tribal and rural communities often to access, to be able to get to their aspirations. Now, Al, you've been an investment banker, you're a private equity investor, but now you're working at CapZone with a new policy mechanism, opportunity zones. Tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing.
Great. Thanks, Tony. And thanks, Michelle and team for having me. It's a great honor to be here. So before we leave the word capital, we define capital at my firm and in my ecosystem as not just financial capital. It's actually the third plank. The top plank is human capital. And there's also intellectual capital, ideas, innovation, and getting ahead. So financial capital is a piece of that, but we actually focus on all three. I run a firm called CapZone Impact Investments. I set it up 8 years ago as one of the first opportunity zone funds in the country. My kids, actually one of whom is going to make me a grandfather in a couple of weeks for the first time, thank you, say that, hey, Dad, don't talk about opportunity zones. Nobody talks to you at cocktail parties anymore because that's all you ever talk about. So what I'm really glad is you guys really can't leave, at least not politely, while I talk about the zones. But just could you put your hands up? Have you ever heard of opportunity zones?
Who's heard about? All right,
okay,
look at that.
I just sometimes, people don't. So look, it's a really, really complicated situation. Number one, it itself is complicated. It's like your personal taxes. You just file them, and if you're right, you don't pay your tax, or you pay the tax you thought, and if you're wrong, you'll pay a penalty. This set of rules that was set up about 8 years ago in 2018 is self-compliance to say you invest in a zone. So what we try to do is help everyone invest in a zone if we believe in what's happening. So if you're gentrifying and doing five-star hotels, we're not going to be involved. If you're doing workforce housing or clean energy or daycare or in our case, we're working a lot with national security, helping build shipyards and other things. We'll get involved, and we're a resource not just for the capital, but for the solution. Most of my career was on Wall Street. I spent a lot of time doing IPOs and financings and what have you. What I want to do at the last phase in my career is focus on opportunity zones. I was I was in the first class of Head Start in 1965 in inner city Chicago. My parents were academics, didn't have a lot of money, but they said, President Johnson has this new pilot program called Head Start, and you're going to go. And by the way, we're busy, so you have to walk yourself. So I remember walking to Head Start, inner city Chicago, as a 5-year-old. And it was great. Barbara Janish was my teacher, learned a lot. So, I think the government can do good things, but often it can do things that aren't so great, right? Pushing people out of communities. So what zones are is a tax regime. It's a tax break. But as long as money goes into a zone, a place. As a country, we don't do that a lot. We do tax breaks by demographics. Are you a farmer? Are you a vet? Are you a student, right? You get a tax break in certain cases. Or by sector, solar, ITC, light tech housing. We don't do it by a place, a polygon. This is a place-based tax break. But that means you really have to be in that place. And it's not that easy to say, like, what if you only have one worker in that place and 50 more, in China, building whatever. That's really not helping the community. So the whole set of rules are about, are you in the place? And then you get the tax break. So that's the big bipartisan aspect of zones. And it is bipartisan, and it just got extended in the bill this year, the tax bill. It's a big, big deal for rural America. Basically, what happened in zones 1.0, we call it, not 2.0 today, but the 1.0 map that's existent today, it was run by HUD, Housing and Urban Development, right? And most of the money went into housing or commercial or office or industrial in urban areas. Rural America said, for the extension and the permanency of the law, which is the case today, only a few months ago, it's a permanent law now forever, it has to have rural America in the mix. And now you get triple the tax break if you invest in rural America. And the map is going to get picked next year by every governor in every state, including this state. But there's a process in place that everyone who cares to say, do I want to attract capital, especially for communities that have been starved of capital over generations? This is the time now to pay attention, because there's a lot of money that's in institutions, insurance companies, corporations, other places that want to get a tax break. Got it, okay. But it's really got to go into the community, and it has to be welcomed to be a good investment. Because if the community doesn't want it, it's not going to be a good investment. So I would just say to everyone, we can talk about some of the models we've been working on. Now's the time to pay attention if your community wants access to investment dollars, not just the equity that gets a tax break, but banks get CRA credit also. So banks are looking to lend into zones, and the federal government wants to put money in the zones because it's the policy of this administration. So I would just say that as we think about Alabama, we bought a shipyard in Mobile with the support of the U.S. Navy last year, so we're very focused on Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. We really want the third coast in this country, which is the Gulf Coast, to get its share of capital, and it hasn't over the years. So I'm very excited about this opportunity.
So opportunity zones, reauthorized, now made permanent, rural, given a special designation, so an opportunity there. Complicated, yes, but worth educating yourself about and looking at models, definitely. And let's stay on this theme of opportunity. And Sherry, I'll start with you. What are the opportunities for tribal and rural areas right now as it relates to clean energy? We've heard a lot about, incentives being rolled back. What are the opportunities?
So clean energy represents for any rural community an opportunity to intervene in a broken system where extraction and exploitation have happened over, since colonization. Clean energy represents an opportunity to take control back of your energy systems. And, I'm fond of saying, how can we be sovereign if we're dependent on outsiders for our energy? The same can apply to any community. How can you have self-determination if you're dependent on utilities and you're dependent on others for your energy? They get to set the cost, they decide when you get turned back on, et cetera. So the opportunity inherent in clean energy is huge. What's happened in the last, year and a half now, the Investing in America compendium of legislation made billions of dollars available to tribal and other communities for clean energy. We looked at it as reparations, restitution. It's, kind of what we were owed for the stolen land, And so, but so many tribal leaders, as Matt, our head of tribal affairs, can attest, were skeptical and said, yeah, right, I'll believe it when it happens. And we saw in basically the 3 years that they were trying to get all this money out that President Biden was trying to release, that there was a gap between what the feds were offering to pay for and what it really costs to develop any kind of clean energy project, but especially the life-changing ones any clean energy installation can be life-changing, but economic changing, utility scale, the ability to participate in wholesale energy markets for the first time. So tribes for the first time had a chance at developing utility scale projects, but it was such a limited window of time, and raising that gap was so hard. So we stood up the Indigenous Power and Light Fund with a goal of $100 million. We have 40 million of that raised, and then the election. Now we've had to pivot. So our grants team, we don't run on federal funding, but we have a grants team that writes grants for and with tribes. We wrote 800 million in grants last year. 484 million were successfully awarded to 47 tribes.
That's worth a clap.
All of that has been clawed back.
That's not worth a clap.
Okay. What, Matt? Maybe a little bit of stuff that got done quickly. All of that has been clawed back. Like literally out of bank accounts. The TEP, the Tribal Electrification Program money. Anna LeBeau, our Chief Impact Officer and Managing Director of this fund, she was head of the Office of Economic Development at the BIA. She called me, so the inauguration happened, what was it, like a Monday or a Tuesday, I think, and you know how they like to do things on Friday nights. I got a call from her crying on Friday night. They just clawed TEP money out of bank accounts. TEP money, Tribal Electrification Program, was what I'm hearing other smatterings of local money meant to solve the problems of that energy poverty at the end of lines, to electrify homes that never had it before, to convert to electricity homes so they could run on clean energy, hitting the most impoverished communities of this nation. They took that first. And they reached into the bank accounts and clawed it out. So, okay, tribes are like, yeah, what else is new? You know, we're resilient. We've been here for millennia. We'll get through this too. But the opportunity emerged in the form of the partnerships that I hear so many of y'all talking about in all of these breakouts. People coalesced and came together, and we pivoted and said, okay, we're not going to use this fund to pay that 20% gap anymore. We're going to pivot, and we're going to triage the requests for support. And we're supporting projects now that change, that basically reduce human suffering, as simple as I can say it. If the rubric we use is elimination of or reduction of energy poverty and human suffering, that's the one that gets the most weight. And that's how we're evaluating things now. So the opportunity is still here. It's just far, far smaller. Native Americans in Philanthropy did a study and found that with all the philanthropy in the world, we could only replace 9% of the federal dollars that were cut. So philanthropy can't do it all, but we can get creative, and we can bind together with partners and pool resources. And we have a Weaver platform, capital stack planning tool that's phenomenal. And so the opportunity is in resilience and innovation. And yeah, is it frustrating that it's so much less money available? Yes, but we're still doing things that are really impactful.
So again, coming back to partnerships, which Kyle's already mentioned, being nimble and adaptable and continuing to be resilient. Kyle, talk a little bit about, amidst the turbulence that your industry is facing, what does it mean to continue to have opportunity, and how are you all thinking about that?
Oh, sure. And that, how to pursue opportunities is certainly shifting. As Sherry had mentioned, agriculture had a lot clawed back too. Certainly not as acute as it would be to a specific demographic, but overall, there were billions in projects that were really focused on rural opportunity building, whether it's processing co-ops, whether it's advancements that can help specifically very rural places that need agricultural advancement to hit the next step. All these really complex, really cool, exciting projects were out there that have unfortunately been either canceled or frozen. And because of that, and when we were a couple years in, so we were really close to having some really key outcomes. But, with some innovation within the ag network, work with universities, work with economic development associations from county level to state level, we found a way to capture some of those outcomes that we were expecting and opportunities in rural environments that unfortunately aren't federally funded anymore. So it's really just required a whole lot of creativity. There's certainly not the same pool of capital. There's not the same resources to advance these rural objectives that we had. But we've seen some really creative people come in and find some solutions and different paths to the goals that we had. So that's really been the key of it, is not letting go of the concept of these rural opportunities, just refiguring how can we create the pathway for it.
Same themes: adaptability, partnerships, staying focused on those outcomes. But Al, we're at the beginning stages now of Opportunity Zones 2.0. My presumption is I'm probably going to hear a little bit about partnerships here, but what are some of the models you're pursuing to make them work in rural? And how should our audience be thinking about that?
So, I've been a student of capital formation and capital flows for all my career, for 43 years. And what I found is inertia is the most powerful force, in the universe, either in motion or at peace. And communities that haven't gotten capital continue not to get capital. I live in Connecticut, but spent most of my career in New York City. And I used to tell people, why do you invest in the Upper East Side of New York? Because other people have invested over the last few hundred years, right? So the concept of money follows safety, money follows, conditions that are conducive to frankly profit. We live in a capitalist society. We don't have to, but we do. And what happens to a lot of rural America, it gets left behind because there's no catalyst event. There's no trigger, there's no spark that says, okay, I want to be here now. And then it's like the Oppenheimer movie, right? To get the bomb before Hitler, you have to build a city, right? You have to build schools and housing and training and daycare to get all those workers to get the bomb before Hitler in World War II. So when I see this law now that just got passed a few months ago, it's a OZ piece within the bill. It says if you go to rural America, you get 3 times the tax break of going to urban America. That's a game changer. If you're a big insurance company or you're a big investor and you can save 30% of your tax bill just by investing before you have a new investment to make money on, it's going to be a magnet. So we know many investors around the country, or frankly around the world, who now want to put hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into OZs. Institutional capital. Most of OZ 1.0 was retail capital. You take your own gain in your own fund, in your own deal, and mostly was real estate and mostly urban. This is going to be a game changer for rural America if investors can get the confidence that something there is going to be that magnet to not only attract the production facility. It could be a factory, it could be a shipyard in our case, but it's going to need workers. Therefore, workers need housing, workers need training, workers need other amenities. So what we're finding is the Defense Department, because we're frankly getting on war footing now for whether it's to take on Putin in Europe or potential other threats around the world, wants to rebuild something called the Defense Industrial Base. The acronym is DIB. So if you hear about the DIB is going to get rebuilt. It's a little bit like not exactly analogous, but Eisenhower with the highways, right? Eisenhower in the 50s built the highway system that connected a lot of America. He didn't pick McDonald's over Burger King on the off-ramp, right? So you still have competition, but you build that infrastructure layer to allow basically good jobs. So what we're doing in Mobile, and we bought the Alabama shipyard last year, 355 acres. We're working with the chamber. We're working with the local community developers, the universities, to say, okay, what is it going to take to bring in approximately 3,000 workers we're going to hire? What's the housing? What's the daycare? What's the training facility? So think of, in rural America, if you have the opportunity to attract something uniquely into your locale, now's the time to start thinking about, okay, if we could get that thing here, we can also help that community change that cadence of, okay, there's another generation that's not going to have access to capital. So I think it's that kind of catalyst event, and be very creative. Remember, every governor in all your states next July 1st has to have a list of every 4 eligible zones, census tracts. The governor gets to pick 1 out of 4. So there's going to be a little bit of a competition to be on the list. And if you can, try to get on that list, because that will be for the next 30 years a magnet for capital.
Great. I'm going to turn to the audience. Who's got questions or comments based on what they're hearing? Got someone right here? We have mics? Why don't you just, you tell me and I will repeat it.
I'm Sherry White Williamson from Renewal, North Carolina, very agricultural. I understand what you're saying about opportunity zones and the partner with the chamber and other places like that. For an organization like ours, that's the usual suspects and we will not benefit from it. So what do you suggest happens to make that?
So in terms of the partners that you were just talking about, Al, around opportunity zones, communities of color have often not benefited from work that gets done through those particular players. What would you suggest in terms of making sure that the benefits are more inclusive?
No, that's a great question. And I think I see this moment as like this country is off balance, right? For lots of reasons we won't go into here. But in chaos is opportunity. And I think the way to think about it is, go to your North Star. So again, I'm just going to go to what I'm doing. So I'm in Mobile. Bishop State is a historically black college university in town. I went and visited a few times. We're going to put our equipment on premise so those students can learn how to do welding or whatever other kind of jobs in our yard right out of school versus if they don't want to go to college. So there are kind of creative ways to be inclusive that you just have to go make happen. What's nice about opportunity zones, there are a lot of bad things, I think, and we avoid those, is there's no certificate, there's no license, there's no approval. You just do it. And if you do it well, the investors will get a tax break. So number one, find investors who also have a social mission, because I think there are a lot who want to do that, number one. Number two, find projects that make a big difference. And they can be one-offs, they can be a whole community of those interests. We were working I'm working in Jackson, Mississippi with the mayor's office on, some of the infrastructure. Of course, we had the water issues, a few years ago. There are other issues too for infrastructure, working with Jackson State. So, work with the institutions who have an interest in finally getting their share of capital. It could be a university, could be a part of town that needs kind of an anchor institution. But I really think it's just making it happen now.
What about putting a fund together that folks from the community would actually invest in? I
think that's a great idea. And remember, a fund, again, nomenclature is the worst thing about OZs because it actually doesn't make a lot of sense. So first of all, a fund does not have to be a fund. My company, Capstone Impact Investments LLC company, limited liability company, we count as a fund. So number one, you can set up your company as a fund, attract investors who want to make a difference, who will get a tax break, got it, but it's really going to the community. So I would say yes. So for any area of the country, for any type of investment or any other type of approach, stage of investment, set up a fund. It's like a 401k. You can do it in 10 minutes. There's no approvals needed, and you get the tax break for your investors or yourself, but you can do things that really matter. And I think will be a way to show that this capital can do well and good together.
Sherry, what's your take on this question? I mean, you're working with tribes on as you said, energy sovereignty, right? That is kind of an ownership, like you want them to own. So how, when you're putting partnerships together, are you ensuring that those partnerships are coming back to the folks that you want to make sure have kind of the value and the long-term sustainability with them?
Good question. Well, as we were saying, clean energy can be done just as extractively as fossil energy if we're not careful. And throughout the country, rural and tribal communities have been exploited because they didn't know any better.
Just because it's clean doesn't mean it's going to be inclusive and benefit everybody.
Yeah, right. We see tribes in places that have leased their land for $11 an acre and have no ownership in the infrastructure that's there and making money for corporations. One of the biggest parts of our work that I'm proud of is raising that awareness. So when we are approached by a tribe for support, we don't dictate, like we don't prescribe. We listen and say, what do you want? Some tribes don't want to own big energy infrastructure. They're okay with less than 50% ownership. But for those that do, we help to match them with partners who are willing to be in equitable relationships. We have a program called Pathways to Trust, and it's a learning journey towards equitable tribal partnerships. Our own Matt Dannenberg you can bring him into your living room. It lives on the Solar Energy Industry Association website. But this is to educate non-native people and companies, which are made up of individuals who want to understand how to work with our communities. And many times they exploit just because they don't get it. Many times they exploit because they exploit. But so there's things that we can do to help teach and provide information that helps outside developers be in right relation with tribes, understand that our communities all have different ways of operating and being, whether you're tribal or rural. Teach, don't preach, listen more than you speak and learn more than you teach is our mantra. And if a tribe wants to be primary owner of a project, that's what we search for. With the rescindment of so much federal funding, the balance is tipped now. So you see tribes saying, okay, we want the clean energy, we want some revenue generation, we're willing to look at less than an equity share. But that's self-determination. That's them making that decision for themselves. But our number one is to protect tribal best interest, and we take our cues from the tribe and our orders from the tribe.
Kyle, anything to add from the partnerships and the perspective that you've been putting together?
Sure. I think it's oftentimes rural communities are, your fund or your capitalizer normally doesn't come from a rural community. They're coming into the community. And in a world, especially when it's in a competitive space, there's exploitation, not necessarily by design of an individual, but the system is built where you want the lowest cost, you want the most profit, you want to take advantage of opportunities where it's available. And if a rural community isn't structured in a way where you have a champion that understands these processes, oftentimes they're either exploited, left out, or don't know how to maximize the benefit of these opportunity zones or opportunities from other places coming into the community. So I think a big focus is that a lot of rural communities need more expertise. And champions that come in and see the advantage of a rural community having some autonomy, knowing that if a new big business or a new big route of a highway system or data centers, whatever it may be, are coming into our rural community, how can we make it still make business sense, but still beneficial for the rural community itself? Which there's experts in those spaces that can structure those deals. They just have to be in place when the deal's getting done. So I think that'll be an important part moving forward to ensure that rural communities aren't left behind, as they have been for all the other big federal deals in decades in the past.
Yeah, and we've got one of those experts on clean energy right here that can work with tribal. But I hear exactly what you're saying, that it's important because a lot of those conversations are very asymmetrical with big capital or large interests coming in from the outside. That communities themselves have to make sure that they're ready and they're educated. And then, Sherry, to your point, you can educate partners who have values that want to ensure that the benefits are shared, can get educated to make sure that the operations and the deal itself lines up with those values. Go to the crowd again here.
Hello, I'm Valerie Hill-Rawls of the Eco Womanist Institute, and I'm going to piggyback off of what this sister said. Rural, what is the definition of rural? Black rural and white rural are two different places. And the usual suspects are the reason we have the problems. So I think when we start to have this discussion about rural, we need to be really clear about who are the benefactors, even within the rural sector. There are people who own shiny things that look like people. And the people who own those shiny things that look like people are the same ones that are benefactors when resources show up. So I would hope that all of you, and I'm turning to look at everybody in this room, when you're having conversations about the rural sector, when you communicate about the rural sector, be more inclusive of what the rural sector is and is not. Be more honest about what the rural sector can and will and should do and who's participating at the table. Make sure that the table is public, private, philanthropic, faith-based, and citizen sector of diverse ethnicity.
I hope.
So that's all I have to say is teach as we continue to build together. Because if we don't work together, the rural sector is going to be just like urban America. The haves will haves, the have-nots will continue not to have. So I kudos to you, sister, and to all of you, actually. But we really have to redefine what does rural look like in the context of all participants in the rural sector.
Do I hear a hallelujah?
Hallelujah.
That was actually great. Thank you very much for both that insight and also the call to action. I'll just tell a story. I was interviewing Kathy Eden, who wrote a book called The Injustice of Place, that actually mapped out where the least advantaged places are in the US. And it surprised her because she was an urbanist and she figured all those places were going to be in urban places, but it turned out that they were rural. And when I asked her about policy that's created to actually address those injustices, she was very skeptical. She said, because what happens is folks come in from the outside and they go to the usual suspects who already have, because they have political capital, they already have some wealth, they have that investment, and it ends up continuing to create that, to reinforce that cycle. And so I think that is the challenge to all of us here, is to make that circle more inclusive, make it more representative of everybody who's in rural, and to ensure that it's not an extractive economy, no matter whether it's a clean energy economy, no matter whether it's agriculture, no matter whether it's opportunity zones and all the different things that can happen through opportunity zones. And that those benefits are both widely shared, but they're also co-designed with the folks in those particular places. Having said that, a lot of those places will end up in opportunity zones. And so there is the opportunity for capital to get there. It just needs to make sure, I think we just need to make sure that the design is inclusive on that. Other questions or comments from the crowd?
For our last audience question.
We're down to the last
Thank you.
audience.
Alicia Scott, Coalitical. Thank you for Eco Womanist Institute for uplifting that it's the usual suspects. Most studies from the Government Accountability Office as well as the Census Bureau show that opportunity zones, because they target the abatement of capital gains tax, the benefits skew upwards along the economic scale, which translates into basically, I don't want to inflame anybody, but a gentrification model. Most of the opportunity zones previously picked, and probably that will be picked in the future, will align with the governor's political party and what his wealthiest donors, where they want to get in. How do you propose using an equitable ownership model? And I say equitable because when we use the word inclusive, it implies that the same people own those spaces and want to include outsiders. We need ownership within the communities. And are you looking at an investment model that translates into the people in that community being part owners in whatever project it is? The second part to the question is CBAs, Community Benefits Agreement, always come into community. And because the buzzword benefit is there, most of those communities don't think of it in terms of, do I even need this? Do we even want this? Right. They immediately default to, how can I get a piece of this? And it may not be what's in their best interest. Right. So people, Americans, we largely lack the ability to critically think. We're given an option and we think that this is the only road we can go down. How do you all propose, as proponents of investing in rural communities, because one, Black communities tend to be plagued with heirs property issues, which gives them very little local government leverage to negotiate from a place of power?
Al, why don't you take on the opportunity zones, and then Sherry, I want to come to you for the CBAs.
So look, a lot of your insights are spot on. the history of this, it's a tax break. It's not even a program. There's no program. You and I could both invest in the same deal. You do everything correct. I don't. You get a tax break. I don't. So there's no program. It's just a flow of money. The problem with Opportunity Zone 1.0, it came out of nowhere. It was thrown in the tax cut bill. And people said to be in the zone, I have to see the asset. So basically, over 95% of the money went into real estate and went into concentrated real estate locales, urban areas, because you could do the multifamily and the office and the stuff that would get you a clear return.
And to be fair, to her point, a lot of the criticism that it was going to deals that were going to get done anyway.
All true. Right. And remember, that was the starting point on something that was complicated, and people basically were going to do it anyway, and they used their own gain. It was a very retail program. My gain in my fund in my deal. The law said investment. It didn't say real estate. So what happened in 2020, after 2 years of doing the draft regulations that were finalized, I hate to get into technical stuff, but a lease, not ownership, a lease is a good asset for compliance reasons, which meant companies that generate jobs can get the tax break. That was not the case the first 2 years. So a lot of the problems is people who are real estate developers just did big real estate in urban areas. Vast majority, and that's why you're correct. The law says anything in the polygon gets a tax break. Could be innovation district, it could be a venture company, could be an AI center with good jobs. So it's the vision of saying, once you have this polygon that's a zone, and I agree there's going to be some politics to pick them, so get involved now to get some good ones picked. You can do something really good and get the tax break. You don't have to do the real estate. You could do a job creating company. So I would just say, go on offense. Say what should happen anyway. And now let's go find the money that wants that to happen. Some people who have maybe a broader vision of mission, and let's just do it. And you don't need the government to say it's okay. You just do it. So I agree. The history is mixed, but the future now allows this to happen, especially for rural America. So I would just say, happy to work with you on ways we can improve what happened. But you're correct. There's been a lot of mixed experience.
So take charge of your own experience, co-design what you want to happen, and then go out and get the investment for it. Sherry? CBAs.
So community benefits agreements, developers will come forward with their template, right? And say, here's what we're going to give you.
Of course.
Communities, tear it up. Tell them what you want. What do you need? And give it to them. They need what you have, or they wouldn't be here. So absolutely, positively. And CBAs as a whole, we could do a whole conference on CBAs. When I was an MIT Indigenous Communities Fellow, and we had access to faculty and staff, and I asked a cohort of faculty and staff to do an investigation for a tribal community in northern Minnesota and come up with the tribal benefits agreement for a 500 megawatt project, which is not happening now that the federal funding was rescinded. But anyway, it took them a year to determine what the community as a whole wanted, because what you want and you want and you want is different.
Right.
And to get consensus in any community where you're 100 people or 100,000 people is next to impossible. But it's so important to represent at least a cross-section of the community in those benefit agreements. The other thing is there's no template. We're all so individual. You've seen one community, you've seen them all? No. You've seen one tribe, you've seen them all? No. So push. Get your legislators to push on these developers that are coming to town with data centers and everything else. I've seen communities torn apart around offshore wind and East Coast tribes where one tribe, because the wind farm is in their view shed, which is part of our cultural, practices and ceremony where the sun comes up. One tribe wanted it. One tribe didn't, because one tribe got what they wanted in a community benefits agreement, but this tribe didn't. So then it pits communities next to each other, against each other. This is not for kids, this whole community benefits agreement discussion. It shouldn't just be taken, they've got that. Get involved in that discussion.
Yeah, I think it's really important to take into account how important it is to give space and resources for a community itself to start to define what it feels like it needs. And also for that to be thinking long-term and sustainable rather than just sort of a short-term payout. Now, we're getting to the end of our time, so I'm going to go to a lightning round here. So given the conversation we've just had, I'm just going to ask everybody very quickly to be able to maximize the benefits and opportunities in whatever arena that you're working. What's the one thing that you want to just leave in everybody's mind that they need to keep in mind before we leave here? Kyle, I'll start with you.
Well, quickly, I would say heirs property laws were mentioned, and that's been a plague on the Black community for ages. Similar to other issues and problems, I think getting ahead of it on the front end and seeing that there is benefit to not being in an heirs property situation. See, and I think rural communities have to find what's the benefit for us being here, what's the benefit for us participating, no matter what the industry or the company is coming in or the development plan or whatever it may be. All of it can work for a rural community as long as the terms fit. And that, whether it's a development, whether it's a data center, whether it's a new capital infusion into a rural area, whatever it may be, as long as the terms are set to fit that community and be beneficial, then it's mission accomplished. So I think that should be the mindset coming in, is that how can we ensure that whatever's coming, wherever it's coming from, is beneficial for this area. And then that's how I've seen successful projects grow into the next one.
So do it on your terms. Do it on your own.
Do it on your terms. Do it in a way that is beneficial for the students, beneficial for the people that are residents, beneficial for people that want to be in that community and have been for a long time. And no matter what the deal is, looking through it from that lens ensures that we're going to benefit for the long term, no matter what it is. It makes the recruitment process a lot easier when you know how you want to benefit.
Sherry, what would you say?
Educate yourselves, your community, about all of this before you're approached, hopefully, and then be proactive about going after what works for your community. For some, it's residential. For some, it's commercial. For some, it's utility scale. Just be educated and partner with allies. Find those that have what you don't have in terms of knowledge and expertise, and partner. We're stronger together.
Wonderful. Al?
So I think as a species, we're entering one of the most difficult periods for human beings, right? With the challenges of artificial intelligence, what's the role of the human being? It's not clear, how it all works out over the next few decades. Number two, our youth, the pressures on our youth, just unbelievable. The next generation doesn't, I think, have the benefits many of us in this room had, and the stress in the system's really high. So the way you should think about financial capital, because that's my little narrow lane I bring to this discussion, it's just a tool. Financial capital is a tool. So use it for what should happen. Have it mix into the priorities that have been set above what an investor wants or what a governor wants or what anyone else wants, and just try hard. I'm inspired by very close here. The civil rights movement was very active in the 60s, and it's inspiring that people make a difference. So just let's all keep doing it and trying.
Educate yourself, design it inclusively, get it done on your own terms. How about a round of applause for the wisdom that we have from this panel? Thank you so much. It was really wonderful. Thank you.